Hey everybody, I'm Big John, and this week on Liberty Lens, you know, there's a Warren Buffett quote that keeps bouncing around my empty head. He once said, in looking for the right people to hire, you look for three qualities: integrity, intelligence, and energy. Now, if the person doesn't have the first of those qualities, the other two will kill you. And Americans aren't just upset about policy and government anymore. They're just questioning whether government itself has the integrity to act in good faith. From transparency fights to internal MAGA civil wars, as it were. Tonight, Mike Termott and I are going to dig into what happens when integrity stops being the baseline we can accept in our government. All right, everyone, that's the setup for tonight's episode. Mike Termott, how you doing, sir? How you feeling today?
Good to be with you. Very good to be with you because it's good to be with someone with so much integrity. I really appreciate you.
I'm looking around for that person. I don't see anybody else in the room. So, but thanks, Mike, for that. And obviously, this is an issue that American government in general has been suffering from for quite a while. A recent Pew poll indicated that as of November 2025, so less than a month ago, only 17% of Americans feel that their government can be trusted, and let me use the exact word, trusted to do the right thing either all or most of the time. Only 17% of Americans. And if you're wondering how that breaks down politically, of that 17%, 26% view the government as having integrity. That's 26% of GOP and GOP leaning, 9% of Democrats and Democratic leaning. So even under the best slice of that, not too good. Now, in fairness, the last, 25, 30 years, that number has never risen above 30%. So, and Pew has been tracking this sort of attitudinal survey since 1960. So, in the last 65 years, we've seen a steady decline in how much integrity Americans feel their government possesses, Mike. So, first of all, before we get into it, and talking about this, tell me your general feelings about people trust government less today than they did after Vietnam, after Watergate, after 9/11. Like, in terms of integrity, we are almost at all-time lows. The lowest poll number on record is 15%, and that was in 2011. But we're at 17% now. There's a lot going on. Give me your general thoughts before we go into the details here.
I think in general, John, no one should be surprised by this. I don't think most Americans are surprised by this. And I think the reason we're not surprised is because we're all in on it. To the extent to which some of us were not maybe paying attention 30 years ago or 60 years ago, maybe that number was higher for that reason. I don't believe, however, that it's the case that number in the past was all that high because there were a lot of people who were both paying attention and trusted the government. I think it was really a matter of now more than ever, people pay very close attention. Now, part of the motivation for that is that we've learned over the years that we shouldn't be trusting the government. I also don't think it's the case that now we trust the government less because the government is more prone to lie to us than ever before. I would go so far as to argue that the federal government of the United States has not been, I'm probably not the right guy to talk about the 18th or the 19th centuries, but certainly in our lifetimes, right, the government has not been an organization that has been operating in a trustworthy fashion and has been lying to us fairly consistently. And there are different definitions of lying to us, right? In some cases, it's just overtly telling us things that aren't true and doing so in order to deceive us, just lying to us. And in some cases, it's just not being forthcoming or scooching perception here or there. And we know the federal government has been in the business of projecting power around the world, including lying to others. And and how it goes about its business internationally, and then misleading us about that. That's, this is not just a domestic issue, is my point. It's a foreign policy issue as well. So I don't think people are terribly shocked by it. I thought it was really interesting. You pointed out that Republicans trusted the federal government a little bit more than Democrats at this moment.
Right.
At this moment, I'm guessing, I don't have data in front of me on this, but I'm guessing that a few years ago, those numbers might have been reversed. But I doubt that during the Biden administration, Democrats' trust of the federal government was all that high.
Right. It was slightly higher in general, but it's been trending lower even over the last 10 years.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
You're right. It is surprising for a movement that came in under the very explicit, like, drain the swamp and everything, that all of a sudden, not that 26% is a rousing endorsement, right?
No, it's not.
But I would have expected that to be a little bit lower, quite honestly.
Lower than 26.
Right. Yeah.
Wow.
Among Republicans and MAGA, absolutely. Because I think part of the MAGA, and this is what we could talk about, part of the MAGA appeal is that all government, no part of government can be trusted, right? Like, that's a large part of what the MAGA base holds dear, right? So even if you trust Donald Trump, you don't trust all the shady characters around him, right? He's still trying to drain the swamp, even if you're a Trump fan. So to that extent, 26%, despite it being low, I still find it a little high, perhaps. I was a little shocked
and
that it was
if
that
my
high.
theory is right, that it takes time to lose whatever confidence you might have had in someone, that number, to your point and mine, could be going lower in the future.
Yeah. And more interestingly, nice segue, Mike. The reason we kind of fell into the subject for this week is there's been a lot of little flash incidents in the past week since our last episode that kind of indicated to us, like, hey, this fracture may not just be a media manufactured talking point. We had, for example, Vice President J.D. Vance at the TPUSA, what is it, America Fest,
Turning Point USA, America Fest,
where he implored basically the audience and the attendees, like, let's not turn on each other. The right needs to stay united at this moment, at this time, because it's always, Mike, what is it? It's always the most critical time in history is right now, as always in politics, right?
Well, if you're trying to become president in 3 years, it's a very important time.
So to the extent that he said we have to stick together, we can't turn on each other, we can't cannibalize each other in this movement. Right. And we have other incidents, but what do you think the vice president, if anything specifically, was he referring to? Because this didn't just come out of nowhere, right? He could have talked about how united they are, and he could have talked about how wonderful USA is. Instead, he chose to say, let's not turn on each other, Mike.
Right. Well, he's clearly talking about Nick Fuentes, and he's talking about Ben Shapiro throwing Fuentes under the bus, and Tucker Carlson under the bus, Megyn Kelly under the bus, Candace Owens under the bus. He's been throwing a lot of people under the bus. And that may or may not be marginally interesting to some people. But what is interesting is that someone is throwing someone under the bus, that there is a rift, right? I'm less curious and interested in the reasons why some podcaster thinks some other podcaster is a loser, right? Some of this is just competitive self-motivation. I'm sure there have been times when Chevrolet called Ford's losers, but that's just, it's just sport. In this case, I think it's more interesting that these are folks that believe that they're parts of the Republican Party. Whether or not they're actually parts of the Republican Party is worth discussing, because I think you can put a good argument together that suggests they're just entertainment. This is the Cowboys and the Redskins going at it, and these people are just cheerleaders.
The Cowboys and the Commanders. Let me correct you there. I know that was a faux pas.
Absolutely right. All right, now that's funny. That's funny. Well, I've got enough gray hair that
I got you.
Maybe I can go back to the Redskins.
Yeah,
I apologize. The Commanders and the Cowboys are playing, and these podcasters really are just cheerleaders, and that doesn't mean that it should be against the law to pay attention to them. I think we've been, every one of us has been to a ball game and caught looking at the cheerleaders now and again. And, we think that that's important, but it's not really central to how the game is played and what the outcome is going to be. And I think that to a certain extent, these podcasters fall into that category. They have a lot of viewers that are interested in politics, but more as entertainment than deep feelings about the podcast that they watch being an important vehicle for how they educate themselves in terms of who, for whom they're going to vote in a Republican presidential primary.
Now, Mike, let me cut in here because I think this is a point worth examining a little bit, because while I agree with you, it is just a facade, right? And I've long felt that way about podcasters. Yes, it's the industry that I'm in. It's the industry that you're participating in right now. But
yeah, let's not go too far with this, right? Let's not say that all podcasters are worthless.
Right.
This one is something you should pay close attention to. Right. This is the one that's going to educate you. Right. All the others, right?
Yeah, they stink. Yes, but what I meant to say by that is that very clearly the Trump administration, Trump as a personality, as a cult of personality, has really relied on alternative media. What initially was alternative media, podcasts, the Joe Rogans, the Ben Shapiros, the Tim Pools, Candace Owens, you bring up, right? Fuentes, I think, goes into a different category, but let's focus on those guys now, the bigger ones, right? And a lot of their narrative in building up their support and building up the base was, don't listen to mainstream media. They're liars. They don't tell you the truth. The people who tell you the truth are the people we endorse, which are the Joe Rogans, the Tim Pools. Lately, a lot of comedians came into that tent. Andrew Schultz. There was one more that I can't remember right now, but Theo Vaughn, right? A big, had Trump and Vance on their podcast, right? So the Trump administration, MAGA perhaps generally, I think podcasters to them have become a source of truth. Now, I'm not, I don't judge that for anything other than a fact, because, like 30 years ago, 40, 50 years ago, a young Mike Termott and a young Big John probably would have said maybe Walter Cronkite was a source of truth for us, right? Or if you go back far
Very
enough,
young.
or before, for our parents, perhaps it was Edward R. Murrow, right?
Right.
So like I'm not disparaging the fact that MAGA looks upon the Ben Shapiro's, Candace Owens, and the lot as sources of truth. But the point is, I think that Vance is aware of the fact that, hey, especially in this most recent election, these podcasters really gave the president a boost when he couldn't count on one from the mainstream media, from the traditional news sources, which we all know have all traditionally leaned left, right? So to that extent, if this sort of ecosystem is now turning on MAGA, is now turning on the president and his policies, which we've seen to some extent. Ben Shapiro has criticized a lot of the stuff that's been going on. You now have these Tim Pool, Candace Owens, Fuentes, that is even more polarizing because of his perceived anti-Semitic stances, right? And far-right stances. So to that extent, Mike, not necessarily the personalities and who likes each other and who hates each other, but as a tool for projecting the MAGA message, how big of a deal is this? And is that why Vance kind of stood up and initially said, hey, let's turn our guns on them, not on ourselves?
Yeah, I'm still not buying. That was a valiant effort. I'm still not buying it.
Fair enough.
Look, the importance of them is as a group. There's no one of them that is important.
Sure.
Social media and podcasting obviously is a huge source of information. No question about it. But the differences among them, I think, have been exaggerated and are slightly silly. There are certain aspects that are important, right? All you need to do is contrast the reaction of Vivek Ramaswamy to what's been going on in the podcast world to the reaction of J.D. Vance to what's been going on. Ramaswamy has very clearly said, if you believe that Hitler was an effing cool guy, there's no place for you in this party or in the conservative movement. Very, very clear. And by the way, I think he is both clear from a moral standpoint, and I think he's technically correct. I think his projection, his anticipation, his prognostication, I think he's correct about that. On the other hand, Vance is trying to hold together what he perceives as the Trump coalition so that he can win the presidency of the United States. I think that is a huge mistake in terms of attitude. And I don't just mean huge mistake, he should become president of the United States. I'm not weighing in on that. I think it's a huge mistake to pursue this with that attitude.
Right.
Because the Trump coalition was formed by Donald Trump being really edgy. I'm going to say what it is that I'm feeling at this moment, which could be different from yesterday and tomorrow.
Right.
And you idiots all fall in line, or you know what? If you hate my guts, that's okay too.
Right.
You cannot go out there with the attitude that we need to hold this coalition together. Can't we all just get along? Right? If, that might work every other decade for the Democrats, it's not going to work with a bunch of young people who don't trust politicians when you go out there and you try to sound like a politician. That's what politicians sound like, right? That's what politicians do. They try to hold coalitions together and encourage everyone to get along, and everyone's got to be nice to each other. I'm going to be nice to everybody. Everyone's going to be nice to me. That's what politicians do. They don't want a politician. And if J.D. Vance is going to turn himself into that, he will find a way to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. Because he came in a poll recently at 22% of Republican voters thought he was the front runner. Picked him as their number one at the moment. Right. I was a little surprised that number was so low.
I agree.
You mentioned you would have thought the 26% might be on its way to 19.
Yeah.
I think JD's number is on the way up from 22, but I would have thought he were in the 30s or 40s at this point, right? Because no one else is challenged. No one else distant second place. I don't even remember who was second on the list.
Right.
I thought that was a weird thing. If he's going to pander to anti-institutionalists, he's got to sound like an anti-institutionalist.
Right.
And so he's going to have to draw some hard lines in my view. And I think, throwing Nick Fuentes over the boat ought to be fairly easy. And we know, I shouldn't say we know, but personally, I've said this many times before, I'm not a JD fan.
Right.
But I get the impression that he's not at all a racist. I get the impression he's not anti-Semitic. This is just my impression.
Sure.
Who knows? But that's my impression. He has said things about, including recently, the last few days, people have said horrible things about his wife and by implication about his kids, and that bothers him. Okay, I get that. That's wholly reasonable, right? But it's got to be about more than that. You've got to get pissed earlier than they insulted my wife.
Right.
right? You know, you come after Irish Lutherans and you say horrible things about them, and I tolerate that, and then finally you say something about my wife, and now I say, okay, now that you've insulted, an Irish Lutheran, now I'm pissed, right?
Right.
That's a little late. And
Right.
I think that JD has got to get a little bit higher on his horse.
So let me throw this at you then. Is it a combination of two things? One, what you just mentioned about JD Vance, like why isn't he a little bit more again, the integrity issue. Like if you see someone who's either racist or anti-Semitic or bigoted or whatever, you shouldn't wait till it's a personal insult, right? On principle, you should be against that. And then the second thing, is this though the inevitable conclusion of a big tent strategy? We've seen how it's worked out for Democrats, right? By wanting to bring everybody in under their big tent starting in the mid-90s, the Democrats now get associated with all the AOCs of the world, with all the Ilhan Omars of the world, with every fringe movement, postmodernism, whatever. They get associated with that because that was the bed they chose for themselves. Now they have to lay in it and they have to fight to get out of it. Are Republicans at that stage now by saying, hey, we'll take anybody as long as you love Trump. We don't care what they are, who they are, where they came from. As long as you love Trump, you have a home with us. And that'll be the only requirement for joining, for living under our big tent is you love Trump. Well, Trump is coming near the end of his presidential term. What happens when Trump is 84 years old? He's no longer president. Who is going to lead that big tent? Mike, is this just inevitable? Should Republicans just get used to the fact that, hey, the big tent is starting to collapse because that's what happens to every big tent politically?
Yes, I'm not sure I would have chosen those words, but
Okay.
The tent has to change.
Okay.
It is the resistance to change that causes the coalition to collapse.
Mm.
I believe you're exactly right. I think you put your finger right on it. It is inevitable, right? In the Democratic Party, you cobble together this coalition of a whole lot of folks that may not have a whole lot to do with each other. And then one group, the group that thinks it's a good idea to talk about how important it is to be a victim. And the more you've been victimized, the more important your voice is, right?
Right.
Okay, they're in the tent, they're in the coalition, and they're feeling pretty good about themselves because they've been winning. And Obama throws them a few crumbs, especially in his second term, and all of a sudden it's off to the races. And now they think they're running the place, and they take over Joe Biden's brain,
right?
Which was a real shame, and an easy target to be fair, an easy target, and Biden should have been more resistant to it. He didn't have the coalition to be resistant to it, and a lot of wokeness took over his administration, and it turned off the American people. Okay, so on the Republican side, are there a lot of what do we want to call it? White nationalism going on, right? Let's not quite.
And also Christian nationalism. I think that's the other big part of it as well, right? Like that much like the Reagan coalition in the 80s that brought in a lot of the religious Democrats who felt that their party was slipping away from them.
Right.
MAGA has also brought in that Christian nationalism, white nationalism. There are strains of that, Mike. Yes.
Yeah, there are. And Vance himself has kowtowed to the concept of Christian nationalism. He's kowtowed to the concept of heritage Americans.
Okay, fair enough.
The elected vice president of the United States, if you find yourself using the words heritage Americans, you need to go back in the bathroom and shave again, change your clothes, and come back out. Because that is absolutely unacceptable. You literally don't, and this is an accusation for, a heavy accusation for a guy who's an author, right? But if you believe that heritage Americans is something you should be talking about, you do not understand what America is well enough to be president of the United States. I'm sorry. That is unacceptable. So to your point, we got a variety of nationalisms going on. Let's not call it racism and bigotry yet. Let's peel back a little bit from that. Because when you use words like racism, and bigotry, immediately your audience says, prove it, what was specifically said. And I'm not sure that holds up.
Sure, agreed.
The idea of Christian nationalism and heritage Americans, Vance is all about it. Let's be honest. He's all about it. Okay. There are groups inside the Republican coalition that are more white nationalists that doesn't have a whole lot of overlap with J.D. Vance's views, to be fair to J.D., under my own perception. But these people feel pretty good about themselves the last few years. They started feeling good about themselves in the first Trump administration. I do not blame President Trump for that. I don't blame anyone in his administration for that. Should there have been individuals that shouted them down harder, louder, faster, sooner, more frequently? Yeah, we know that now. And some of us knew it then. But, people don't always do the right thing the way you wish they would. Okay, so there was some tolerance for that kind of thing. And now some of these people just feel so good about themselves. That they're going to start shooting their mouths off. And just like the Democratic Party's got to figure out what to do with AOC, now the Republicans got to figure out what they're going to do with a couple of these knuckleheads who say things in their podcasts that are really anti-Semitic. And in some cases, really racist. And I appreciated what Vivek said the other day, his clarity on the subject. And I wish that Vance would too. And if he doesn't, I'm afraid that he's going to undermine his ability to become president of the United States, quite ironically.
Yeah, and I mean, when you're talking about that, you're talking about the growing tolerance. I won't say acceptance, but tolerance of the Nick Fuentes, Groyper sort of segment out there, aside, as well as some other groups, but those might be, Fuentes and his gang there might be the most out there right now. To your point, I won't say that Vance says these guys are cool. I believe what they believe. But to your point, the fact that he's not disavowing those guys and that other right-wing podcasters are inviting them on to have a conversation, to listen to what they have to say.
And Vance said we have to stop giving each other purity tests.
Which is more concerning in this particular context, right?
And this is the context. I am not putting up with someone suggesting there's any other context.
Okay, fair enough.
When you say Hitler was cool, right? You're not saying he was a snappy dresser or he had a good recipe for chicken salad. There's something he's known for. Like, why are we referencing him? Right?
Yeah.
When you go on stage at Turning Point USA and say, can't we all just get along and stop giving each other purity tests? Is that something you say every year at TPUSA? No. Is it something you say at every one of your family gatherings? No. Why are you saying it now, here, in preparation to run for president of the United States? This is why.
Right. And I mean, as libertarians, we've always had that running joke, right? If libertarians could just stop trying to decide who's the most libertarian amongst ourselves, maybe we would get places, right? But I think the context is different, right? Because in this particular case, you're trying to bring in people to your movement that were it not for just counting on their votes, ideologically, they don't align with you. I would hope.
Right.
To your point, I find it very difficult. I'll agree with you. I don't know Vance personally, but I never got the impression that he would be racist. Obviously, his wife would stand as a counter argument to that assertion, right? And his children, like you mentioned. So it has to be for only one reason, which is like, I think I need them to win. And at that point, I think you're being dishonest with yourself and with your supporters, your actual supporters, and your actual movement. Okay, let's
Yeah, I
move
think
on a
it's a
little
bad
bit.
strategy.
I agree with you.
If I were his political consultant, I'd be like, get your ass out there and tell these people, if you're a racist, you're off the team.
Yeah, and to your point, I didn't acknowledge it before. Good on Vivek for saying that, because he's trying to become governor of Ohio. He's already distanced himself, I think, he's been conspicuous by his absence through a lot of these MAGA rallies, MAGA turnouts, and stuff like that. He's really focusing on becoming governor, and good for him, because he was one of these, libertarian nationalist guys. He's the one who floated that phrase around initially a lot, and I think when he heard a lot of the hatred coming his way over the immigration issues, the H-1B visas in particular, I think that kind of opened his eyes a lot. And I think it's been a calculated distancing from the Vances and such of the world. And
I think you're right. As a matter of fact, I wouldn't be surprised if Vivek has certain days in which he wishes he had not written certain chapters of the book that he published a couple years ago. And I think that this points out how young he was.
Sure.
In terms of politics, obviously a very successful guy in the business world, not too young for that. But his relatively sophomoric approach to the acceptance of the word nationalism, big mistake.
Big mistake. Yeah, I agree with you. All right, let's talk about two more things, at least initially, that show this crack in the Big Ten. Again, and at the basis of those cracks are integrity, I think. The most obvious one is when you have guys like Thomas Massie and Rand Paul, both of us acknowledge libertarian-ish, or libertarians in Republican clothing, whatever you want to describe it as, again, being triggered by a lot of what President Trump has to say, a lot of the actions he's taking. Of course, Massie, not only with the One Big Beautiful Bill standing against that, but also around the Epstein disclosure. They passed the Transparency Act. It's not law. It's not a request. It's not, it's law, statutory. And the fact that the Epstein files were released, but were they released, Mike? No, they weren't. So not full transparency.
Released-ish.
Released-ish. You're right. The first wave, of course, focusing on ex-President Clinton and almost nothing to do with President Trump. A lot of backlash, threats coming from Massie and Khanna saying like, hey, this is law now. You don't get to choose what you redact and what you don't redact, right? And then we had a second wave today. Well, that's not the main focus here. But again, you agree to transparency until you don't. Now you're haggling. So you get this impression, if you're a citizen, you're impressing, okay, the government passed this Transparency Act, and now it's haggling with itself as to what it really meant to be transparent, right? Very quickly, talk to me about that particular situation with the Epstein file released and again, how it plays into this distrust and lack of integrity in the government.
Well, it's insane. It's crazy. It's Trump not knowing his own coalition. And again, part of the charm of Donald Trump's candidacy was that he came off as being out of touch with people who felt differently than he does, right? He was just going to tell you what he was going to tell you, love it or shove it. And he would have benefited, I believe, from a deeper understanding of why it is that people liked that, right? I don't believe people liked everything he said that was anti-immigrant. But people liked the boldness of his statements because it suggested that now they could trust this guy to address what they thought was a problem. And they were right. Voters were right. We were all right that Donald Trump was the guy who was finally going to get a handle on imposing some control over the southern border, right? That all became true. And now there are some folks who believe we should have been paying closer attention to some of the anti-immigrant things that he said along the way too, but that's a different podcast. So now you've got a guy who has said all kinds of horrible things about institutions. If he had understood that that's what it was about, and it wasn't just, I hate everyone who doesn't agree with me, which is, I think, what he must apparently assume it was about. Because this week, I believe President Trump has revealed, if there was any doubt in anyone's mind at all, and I don't know that there was, but he has finally removed all doubt, he is his biggest fan.
Yeah.
And I do believe that he has run the risk and lost the battle in terms of understanding that it was never really about him. That the cult of personality revolved around his personality, which was to run against these institutions and to stand up for the little man, to be the populist. And the moment you think you're pretty cool, that it's the cult of Donald J. Trump, and that you should be putting the word Trump on the Kennedy Center, and you should be putting the word Trump on the new class of battleships, and is spreading that word around everywhere because it's about you. Well, now you've miscalculated. Because what everyone wanted was the Donald J. Trump who would rail against these institutions, rather than, all of a sudden it looks like he's on the side of the DOJ and the DOJ is on his side, and together they have formed this coalition to subvert our ability to see what actually happened.
Yeah, and to your point, again, those of us that have grown up around Donald Trump in New York understand his personality and have always understood his personality. If you're a New Yorker, you can't go 10 feet without seeing his name slapped on some
right.
overtly garish buildings everywhere, right? So everywhere you go, Trump this, Trump that, it's on the side of everything. And to the extent that instead of getting rid of the Kennedy Center, like, I think he would have gotten less pushback if he said, why are we spending any money at all on the Kennedy Center? Why do we care about the Kennedy Center?
Right, it's going to go the way of PBS.
Right. Why doesn't it go perfect? Why doesn't it go the way of PBS? Instead, he embraces it and slaps his name on it. And let's face it, that board was handpicked by Donald Trump. This was the wink towards them, like, thanks for our jobs. Trump goes on that. And then the president, who rather, I think incorrectly, but regardless, claims he's ended 8, 9, 10 wars, depending on the day of the week, decides to name a new class of warships under his name, right?
Yep.
Again,
the biggest battleships ever built.
The most beautiful, hugely big battleships that are number one and all that, as he revs up for war with Venezuela. So when you put it all together, it doesn't sound like someone who is interested in fighting the institutions. It's now coming off as someone who was interested in using the institutions for his own personal agenda, if not aggrandizement. So I think it comes off like that. You're absolutely right.
Which is the opposite.
It's the opposite of
not
what
just a near miss.
Right. It's a 180. You're absolutely right.
It's a 180. It's really bad. And I think that you've got to understand, if you're a politician, you've got to understand. Just recently, James Carville had said in the news about a couple of Democratic politicians that they had violated the first rule of politics, which is it's not about you. It's got to be about your constituents, right? And to state the obvious, sometimes President Trump forgets that. It's fairly obvious at this point. Sometimes he forgets it. He doesn't always forget it, but sometimes he forgets that. And I'm reminded, you titled this episode, It's Integrity Stupid, right? Making fun of the old James Carville line he had written on the wall of the war room during the 1992 Bill Clinton presidential campaign. 3 rules to to guide the behavior of the Clinton staff. And the first one was change versus more of the same. And the second one was the economy stupid, right? And the third one was remember healthcare. And that became a very, very important mantra.
Right.
And we also know that polling data have shown for a million years that people vote on the economy. I believe that the reason people vote on the economy is because that's what they typically care about in terms of their relationship with the government. They don't ask too much of their government, right? Just, make sure the economy works well and I can make a living. That's basically what you're asking of your government. And that's about it. And that's why people vote on the economy, on economic issues. But I would argue, John, that your description of this episode is correct, that it is about integrity. I would go so far as to say it's not about the economy. It's never been about the economy. And that it's never going to be about the economy in the future. It will never be about the economy. As a voter, I care about my economy. I want you, as my hired hand, the politician for whom I'm voting, to care about me. Now, if you care about me, you're going to care about the economy.
Right.
And if I start caring about something else, I start caring about immigration, you better care about immigration. If I start caring about war, you better start caring about war. If I start caring about negotiating our way out of Ukraine, you better start caring about negotiating our way out of Ukraine.
Right.
What I'm looking for as the typical voter, what I'm looking for is someone whose values align with mine. That's what it's about. I need to be able to trust you. As the typical voter, I don't understand economics. I don't understand how the economy works. I got more important things to pay attention to. So I need to know that I can trust you to do the right thing. And the way I'm going to trust you to do the right thing is you're going to say the things that reverberate with my interests. And 8 times out of 10, that's the economy. That's why you should be talking about the economy. But the moment you forget that that's what this is all about and you think it's about you, right? Even if you say it's all about you and that's what's going to make the economy great, that doesn't work for me as the voter. That does not work for me because now I'm going to think it's all transactional. It's not going to stick.
Right.
It's all about integrity. I think it's always going to be about integrity. Can you trust a politician to advance your interests, which are typically economic interests?
Sure.
But can you trust that person to advance your interests? And the moment you make a decision like spending even more money on ships and releasing even fewer files about Jeffrey Epstein, now it's all down the toilet. You can't say, oh, and the economy. I don't care what the unemployment rate is if I don't trust you, because it means that you might do something stupid that's not in my interest that drives up the unemployment rate in the future.
Right. And to the extent that a lot of times you may even hear it as character, right? I care about the character of my candidate, which has always been rule number one with me personally, because I don't expect the president to have the answer to everything. That's why he has a bunch of people around him. But you expect that the character the embodied by the president is the same character by all his minions that he selects around him. So that when the unexpected happens, I may not have the solution as a citizen. I may not have all the information as a citizen. But I have trust that the person who does have access to all those resources has the integrity and the character to do the right thing.
You're absolutely right.
Given those options, right?
I'm surprised that the mainstream media hasn't made a bigger deal out of the Trump administration's requirement that all of the political appointees, all the presidential appointees, adhere to this loyalty pledge to the president.
Right.
That's a big deal. That's a big deal because you can only trust those people. And you and I have talked about how bad they are at their jobs, giving the president crappy advice 100 times.
Right.
You can only trust these people if they have the American citizens' interests at heart,
Right.
which is anathema to this idea that they would pledge loyalty rather to the American people or to the Constitution, which they're required to do legally, but to the president himself personally. That doesn't work.
Well, it doesn't work. And it also plays into that big tent thing, rotting from the inside almost, because if your main goal is my loyalty to the president is first and foremost in everything, then the only way the citizen is happy is if the citizen's goals align with the president's. And maybe initially that was the case, but it may not be the case now.
That's right. And it's the old saying, John, in politics, I don't care what you know about until I know what you care about.
Exactly. Good point, Mike. Let me bring something else up. It may be a throwaway, but I want you to comment on it. MAGA women. I'm wondering if they could still be called MAGA women. We've had some high-profile resignations in the last month or so. The biggest one and the most obvious one, we discussed it in a prior episode, is Marjorie Taylor Greene announcing her retirement, early resignation, effective, I think, January 7th or whatever. And that came over a very public fallout with the president, personality clash, and also largely around the Epstein Transparency Act, where he was initially against it. So she announced her resignation. But two more high-profile MAGA-aligned women who were actually big fans of the president. Lisa Stefanik, representative from New York. A lot of people had her pegged as running against Kathy Hochul to become the next governor of New York. She announces she is suspending her gubernatorial run and she won't seek re-election to Congress. Huge blow, I think, in terms, because she was like one of Trump's number one cheerleaders, who a lot of people, and she wasn't the MTG type, she wasn't the Lauren Boebert type, she wasn't out there.
No, she was fairly credible. She was someone you wanted on your side.
Exactly. Now, I'm not saying the reason stated for her resignation was she wants to spend more time.
By the way, good job throwing Lauren Boebert under the bus there.
I had to throw somebody under the bus.
You just drew that out of nowhere.
Out of nowhere, right? Just put them all together. But look, her and MTG were tied at the hip in a lot of people's minds in their support for the president, right? Yep. So Stefanik, the reason she gave for her stepping back from politics is she wants to spend more time with her family. I take her word at face value. Good for her. And then Senator Loomis announcing that she will not run again and that she'll be stepping down. Now, individually, we kind of know the reasons for this, right? But Mike, do you think there's a different public perception about, is President Trump alienating, let's call them MAGA women, Republican women, who otherwise would have supported him? Do you think it's tied to the Epstein transparency or lack thereof? Or is it just like maybe he's a little too radical for a lot of the females in the Big Tent, in the Republican Big Tent?
I think that these three are too few and too early to tell. You may be right, but I think that they're too few and too early to tell, and the specifics in each case are sufficiently disparate that I don't see a trend here. Loomis is of a certain age, shall we say.
74, I believe. Yes.
Yeah, 74. Not that that's old. But one might think it's time to do something else with one's life when you're 74. Right. And in the case of Stefanik, now that is a conflict with President Trump. He didn't want to endorse her. He didn't want to back her as governor. By the way, that's a mistake, but that's a different podcast. He should have backed Stefanik for a number of reasons, not the least of which is that she would have made a decent candidate. But the other is that if you're going to live and die by the personal pledge of loyalty, then right, you got to put some oomph behind that, right? You got to put some currency to that. You can't just say you're loyal to me and that's that.
Right.
There's got to be some reciprocity or it all falls apart. Everybody, this is politics 202, if not 101.
Right.
It's 101 is it's all about the constituents. 202 is, okay, when it's not about the constituents, at least make good on your disgusting little promises behind the curtain.
Right.
And if you don't do that, it falls apart. So, I worry about the coalition taking a hit in the long run because of that. And in the case of Marjorie Greene, it was an open conflict. I think time will tell, but I also think that there will be plenty of men in this category. I think in a future podcast, we're going to be saying it wasn't just those three, and now it's not just women.
Right.
And in some cases, it's a lack of loyalty. In some cases, it's open conflict. In some cases, it's just lost steam of thinking that the president's interests and yours aligned sufficiently to make it worth it for you.
Yeah, and the reason, just to be clear, the reason I kind of categorized it as MAGA women is because that's a key demographic for the president,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
they swung over to the Republican side for the first time in a long time, maybe since Reagan, where they, at least in his first presidential administration, they really helped put him over the top,
Yep.
Along with larger chunks of the Hispanic vote, right? So if he starts losing women as a voting block, or Republicans start losing women as a voting block, I think that spells real trouble.
I
Okay.
agree with you, and it's
Yeah.
related to the fact that women do polling data show. I don't have a dog in this fight. Don't get mad at me, men. But polling data suggests that women take integrity even more seriously than the average guy. So, these
Yeah.
ethical conundra matter.
Yes. Agreed. 100%. Okay. Let's kind of move now to the sort of like the climax of this episode, which is, I think there's one particular case that I want to talk about that kind of encapsulates in my opinion, what's happening with MAGA politically, with respect to integrity. And here's the thing. Let's talk about Dan Bongino, the associate FBI director. Now, he said something very interesting on an interview with Sean Hannity on Fox News. And I want to give you the exact quote and let you talk about it and draw your own conclusions. The quote that Bongino said, so Sean Hannity was pressing on him saying, hey, listen, before you became the associate FBI director, you had a lot to say about a lot of things on your podcast. And you said, hey, Epstein was murdered. Hey, like he didn't commit suicide and things of that nature. So Sean Hannity
didn't have any stuff about which he knew not.
Right. And his response to Sean Hannity was, look, I was paid in the past for my opinions. One day I'll be back in that space, but that's not what I'm paid for now. I'm paid to be your deputy director, and we base investigations on facts. Now, that to me says a whole lot about a whole lot of different things, Mike, right? I'll give you my take. You tell me what your thoughts are. To me, that statement all but says I was a podcast grifter. Kash Patel was a podcast grifter before we got these jobs, because he is all but saying the stuff that I said during these podcasts had no basis in fact. They were there just to drum up views, drum up likes, and get viral. And by the way, I was paid to say this. I don't know who paid him. That's another big question that never got answered, right? It wasn't just like I earned a living. It was like I was paid for these opinions. As far as I know, Bongino was an independent podcaster. So again,
he was.
Who paid him? Who paid Patel for these things?
I think he means that he got paid by the social media platform.
Fair enough, but I'm just throwing that out there because, like he said, podcasters are allowed to speculate without any basis in fact. But anyway,
good for you.
But so, Mike, talk to me about this, because to me this is fascinating, and I'm surprised it's not getting more traction within MAGA circles. Because, like, are you now saying that what was okay before I got into office, or that's just out the window. I was completely lying back then. And now that I've actually got facts in front of me, a lot of the nonsense that a lot of you guys are still buying into, let's face it, that's not real. How would you look at? Because again,
I think there is some implication of that. My job wasn't tied to facts in the past, right? I could just shoot my mouth off and be entertaining, in some sense, like an actor, right? Singer, songwriter, actor, and podcaster. Sure. It kind of all goes here. And it really has nothing to do with public policy in an intricate sense, in a deep sense, in a sense of integrity. It was barely related. It was related in the sense that, dancing and acting, sometimes they bump into each other and they overlap. It used to be that actors were trained in dancing. And, people who sing think that they can act. Barbara Streisand always thought she was a much better actor than she actually was. These things happen. But this idea that someone would have thought that Dan Bongino would make a good deputy FBI director, that's at least as interesting a part of the story. This is not all Dan's fault, in other words.
Well, yeah, and let me also throw this in. And by the way, I consider Bongino and Patel in the same boat, right? Because they were both sharing the exact same theories. And here's the other little twist. Both of them used whatever institutional credibility they had to strengthen their pre-post assertions, right? So Bongino was like, hey, I'm a former Secret Service guy. I know what happens inside. I know what's going on. And let me tell you, it's rotten to the core. Patel, I used to be a prosecutor. I understand what's wrong. And look, we got to go burn all the stuff. The FBI building should be razed, should be burned to the ground, salted, nothing ever growth there again, right?
Right.
So part of it is they use their credibility, institutional credibility, to say the institution sucks. The institution needs to be burned down. And a lot of people bought into that in their particular cases, Mike. They had huge followings. Listen, we said it at the top. A lot of these podcasters played a huge part in President Trump getting reelected, especially the second time around. Do you feel like these guys have any culpability in, according to Bongino, essentially lying to the American public? And does now MAGA have reason to say, man, were we sold a bill of goods on everything that the president stood for?
The short answer is yes. But we need to learn, as the American public, to be skeptical of those who are skeptical. Not because of their skepticism, but because they have all the same incentives to jerk us around as the mainstream media.
Their skepticism is not immunity in and of itself.
Well said. Well said. Just because you're skeptical doesn't mean that you actually know what's going on. In fact, I would characterize people like Bongino and Kash Patel as fairly manipulative, in the sense that they did have some insight into how the world works, and they chose to use that, as you just described. They chose to use whatever little bit of credibility they have to mislead us about the totality of the worthlessness of every single employee, right? Which is just complete BS. But there are those out there who know even less about these institutions, who are just naive.
Right.
Naive, you can be naive and skeptical at the same time.
Sure.
And a lot of folks are. And I think a lot of podcasts fall into this category. There was a recent debate on Dave Smith's podcast, right? A couple months ago, when he was accused of talking about stuff that he didn't understand because he hadn't physically been to Israel.
With Douglas Murray, you're referring to.
With Douglas Murray. I found that kind of interesting for a number of reasons. First of all, the accusation itself that you can't, the implication was you can't possibly understand what's going on because you haven't been there.
Right.
Really? Because I used to, get paid to talk about the collapse of the stock market in Thailand. Hadn't been there, but I know how financial markets work. So I felt a little defensive on Dave's part, right?
Right.
Now, having said that, Dave, you got to get off your keister and go visit Israel. It's a fantastic and wonderful place, and you need to develop a little bit more appreciation for the culture if you're going to be so hard on the government.
I think Murray can't, just as a side, I agree with you. I think the assertion Murray made was ridiculous. Like, you can't talk about something unless you physically experienced it. That was a silly assertion.
Yeah.
But if I took his underlying point, which I think you're making, is if you purport to be such an expert on the subject and not have had that firsthand experience when you have the opportunity to, I think then you take a back seat to someone who says, look, I lived through this and here's my firsthand experience.
I agree with you.
Saying,
and a guy like Murray should be able to make that case based on something a little sturdier than,
right.
A couple times in the past, I bought airline tickets, right?
Right, right. Yeah, so, it was a poorly formulated argument. I agree.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And what's the, after all, what is the point of trying to throw Dave under the bus? I mean, we've all been critical from time to time of things that Dave has said. And sometimes I think that he just absolutely hits home runs and nails it. So I'm not trying to, suggest one way or another in a more general sense about Dave. But what's the point of saying Dave's wrong because of a lack of experience? Isn't the whole point that we're supposed to be discussing these concepts rather than, you didn't read my book, because Dave made the point, well, I've done a lot of reading. I pay a lot of attention, which is true. Dave doesn't have a degree in this stuff, but he pays a lot of attention. And there are many times when I've really appreciated things that Dave has said. I wouldn't call him up and ask him, what causes interest rate curves to invert. But when it comes to some of these international issues, I think he gets it right. So I thought that was dopey as an example.
Right.
As an example. And I think that you have a lot of podcasters out there who are excruciatingly naive. And they are therefore not held back by reality. They will just say anything.
Right.
They'll just absolutely say anything because there is an audience for one goofy thing or another that they say. I think part of the problem is that someone, presumably President Trump, thought it would be a good idea for Bongino and Patel to run the FBI. I'm sorry, that was not a good idea.
Which a lot of people, ourselves included, when these nominations were made, we questioned Hegseth the most, I think, between you and I. We said, okay, that's the one we're really worried about. I think Patel, you might have been a little more open to than I was. But to me, it always goes back to that integrity thing. If you're going to make a living essentially lying to people on a podcast, it's not a matter of opinion, right? It's not like I think they're dirty. We know they're hiding stuff. He was murdered in that jail cell.
Right.
Like, to me, that's a lack of integrity. And when you say, these are the people that I want to run the world's largest law enforcement agency, that to me is a red flag. And it still is a red flag, by the way, in a lot of these appointments. But that one in particular, because they're also attacking the institution itself. Like, you and I have talked about institutional guardrails, which I think, just to circle back, among all these influencers, Ben Shapiro seems to be the one that's sort of defending the institutional guardrails, right? Like, when he talks, he's like, it's okay to question stuff, but like within these boundaries, right? Like, here's what's acceptable, and you can ping pong between the two. But now when you start going like here, now we're talking crazy stuff, right? And he seems to be that guy, right? Whereas a lot of these other influencers and podcasters are like, yeah, there should be no boundaries. Why not have Nick Fuentes on to talk about Israeli-Palestinian relations, right? Why not? Let's bring him on. He's a known anti-Semite. Let's bring him on. We're just asking questions. We're presenting it to the people. And something Oprah Winfrey once said has stuck with me for 20, 25 years, which was when her show was at its peak, she brought on some neo-Nazis. And she brought on, I think, at the time it might have been Roy Innis to debate them from the old Congress of Racial Equality. And she said initially she did it in the hopes of exposing these white nationalists, these racists and bigots, the disinfectant of sunlight.
Yeah.
And what happened was their membership spiked. Their interest in their group spiked because she, when you're dealing at scale, you're going to get all the characters coming out of the woodwork, right? And she said she learned her lesson that she would never do that again. She would never platform a racist again. Now, whether she actually stuck to that or not, I haven't done the research. But in that same extent, Mike, do you feel that someone like Tucker Carlson, someone like Joe Rogan, someone like Dave Smith, and I know definitely Dave Smith and Tucker have done this. I'm not sure about Joe Rogan. When they invite someone like a Nick Fuentes on to, quote, ask questions and have a conversation, are they doing more harm than good to their own cause?
I think the answer is yes. One of my favorite professors when I was in grad school several millennia ago, he used to say, the clock has struck 13.
Okay.
And what that means, is that there's something off. There's something off. And maybe I don't know what it is. Maybe to me, the clock is a black box. I don't know what's wrong with the clock. I just know that it's wrong. When the clock strikes 13, not only do you not know what time it is, right? It does not mean it's 1 o'clock. It does not mean it's 12 o'clock. It just means you have a broken clock. Not only do you not know what time it is, you don't know what time it ever was. Meaning
everything gets thrown into doubt is what you're saying.
Everything gets thrown into doubt. Remember when it struck 9 times? Now you're not so sure it was 9 o'clock, are you? Okay.
Right.
If you come to me as a 27-year-old podcaster and you say Hitler is pretty cool, and I think that Jews have an iron grip on Congress, right? Okay. As someone who's been to the Hill a few thousand times and worked with those idiots, I can tell you that there are a hell of a lot of weird things that also have grips on Congress besides just, Jews and Israeli government interests, right?
AIPAC, yep.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. I'm not saying any of it is good. I'm just saying there's a lot going on there, right? And no, Hitler was not cool. Okay, so if you're saying these things, your clock for me has struck 13.
Right.
I'm not asking you about your chicken salad. I just know you're a crazy guy.
Right.
That's all I know. I just know you're crazy. So you tell me, the expiration date on the whole milk isn't until tomorrow. We're good to go. I'm checking it.
Right.
I'm not trusting that guy with anything. I'm not having him on my show because there's no reason to believe that he's going to have a whole lot to say that I can trust. And let's be fair to reality once in a while. Aren't there other people in the United States who are articulate and smart and young, who are critical of the Israeli government, of the way they have prosecuted the war in Gaza, on the relationship between Jerusalem and Washington, critical of the Netanyahu administration? All these things you and I have done, right? Now, we're not as young, but we've said all these things.
Sure.
Surely Tucker could have found someone to make that case other than someone who thought Hitler was cool.
Right.
And surely Tucker knows that. Right. So why did he have this guy on? He wants his clicks. And what it has done it has indicated that maybe Tucker's clock has struck 13 a little bit, in the sense that now I know that Tucker's, if nothing else, a little bit lazy. Little bit lazy, maybe. Here's a lazy way to present myself to a new audience. And that's important to me, more important than worrying about whether my guests are all that credible.
Right.
All right, that bothers me. Now, as a Republican, as a conservative, as a libertarian, I've watched Tucker in the past. Some of his episodes I find very interesting.
Sure.
I think he's a very smart, very articulate guy, very thoughtful guy. Once in a while he says something goofy, but I can say that about myself. I'm less inclined to watch that program, to be honest. I watch programs like a lot of us. I watch some of these programs for information, for credible sources, for a new point of view.
Sure.
On the margin, am I more likely or less likely to watch that guy after he has platformed someone who just lacks credibility?
Right.
I'm going to say slightly less likely.
Right.
That's a problem. That's a problem. And on the other hand, you've got Ben Shapiro throwing these people under the bus, right? Ben went hard on Tucker Carlson.
Sure.
He went
and Candace Owens. Yeah.
Candace Owens, who I find less important. But he went hard.
No, I agree with you.
He went hard on Tucker Carlson. And I'm about to say something negative about Ben Shapiro, but before I do that, let me point out that I think Ben Shapiro is one of the smartest guys out there.
Sure.
Super articulate, super thoughtful, super detail-oriented on many, many subjects, many topics. You can't find a better guy. Cannot find a better guy. Okay. But when he works so hard at backing everything that Netanyahu does, it's like, I don't know Ben Shapiro, right? Because if I did, I'd be texting, can you throw reality a bone once in a while, right? And I get it. We have our favorites, and we sympathize with certain interests. We all have biases, and I have no doubt that he is sincere, right? Ben Shapiro is nothing if not sincere. But he's got a little bias going on. Sure. And I wish that he would put that in the drawer a little bit, because it would make, that's his clock striking 13 a little bit. Obviously not as bad as some of these other goofballs. I don't mean it's the same.
Sure.
But just slightly undermines his own credibility in the topic area in which credibility is the currency.
Yeah, but I will say, I agree with you, by the way, about Ben Shapiro specifically, but I will say one thing. He's made his bias on Israel very clear.
Yeah.
And it's almost like if you know the subject's going to be Israel or Israeli related, you kind of know, like, I'm not going to tune into Ben Shapiro to get what I think is an unbiased opinion, because he's very biased. I think he's open about it.
And there have been times when, the Israeli government has done something really dumb frequently the last couple of years. And I'll be like, how do they defend this? I'll go listen to Ben Shapiro.
Right. Good point. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
What is the possible positive spin on this? Well, go to Ben. He's going to give you, he's better at it than the Israeli government.
Yeah, but to your point, I think it's even more when the loss of credibility comes in an area that, like, literally everyone can almost universally agree is wrong, right? Like, I think we can all universally. It used to be a Norm Macdonald joke, right? He used to say, like, "Hey, I was just reading up on this Hitler guy. I don't know if you've heard about this, but he was a real jerk," And he would always say something like that was so obvious, but he would be incredulous. Like, I just read up on Hitler and he was a real jerk. And it's almost like that. It's a joke, but at the same time, it should be something that we all agree on. Like, if you try to defend Hitler, it's a losing argument. And if you platform somebody who does that, it eats away at your own credibility, which otherwise might be unvarnished. Once you do that, there's no going back from that. And I think that's the point we're trying to make about someone like a Tucker Carlson inviting, or a JD Vance, not outwardly, just to tie this up to the original point, someone like a JD Vance not outwardly saying there's no place for Nick Fuentes and the Groypers in our conservative movement. There's
And I
no
think
room for him in the
I think he
MAGA movement.
has to say that as a campaign strategy. One of the things when you told me this week what you wanted to talk about, it was on the heels of me seeing this poll on CNN that I promised I wanted to bring up real quick.
Yeah.
CNN had run this poll and asked who your favorite Republican presidential candidate is, your favorite Democratic presidential candidate, blah, blah, blah. And as we met, I was surprised that Gavin Newsom was at like 12%, right?
Right.
I thought he would have been at 25, and I thought JD Vance's 25 would have been at 45. But
Right.
Okay, so these guys aren't quite as hot right now as I had thought. They asked everybody else. For those of you who don't have a favorite yet, which is most of you, right? It's like 60% of Republicans, 60% of Democrats. What are you looking for? And they gave them a list of things that you're looking for, right? One of the things on the list was the economy / affordability. A huge, right? Like everything in the economy, affordability in general, huge category. Like everything that even rhymes with money is in this one category. Surely that category would win because it's huge.
Right.
And because it's always about the economy.
Right.
Came in 5th place.
Right.
And the 4 things that beat it, and number 6, were all versions of tell me the truth, care about me, show some empathy, some integrity. That's all versions of your topic for today, right?
Right.
And this is why I say it's not about the economy. I don't think it's ever been about the economy. The economy is the vehicle we choose to discuss these things so that you can demonstrate you care about me.
Right.
And it makes me wonder whether your other favorite topic area, Mamdani in New York,
right,
maybe it wasn't really affordability that got him elected. When he was talking about affordability, what he was saying was, I hear you. I see you.
Right.
I care about what you care about. If it weren't affordability, if everyone cared about something else, you would have cared about that, right?
Right.
And by the way, I'm not the candidate who is a sexual harasser, and I'm not the candidate who is endorsed by a sexual harasser. I'm starting to think not only was it not about the economy, it never was.
Yeah, that he connected with people on a very visceral level, and that their concerns were his concerns. Yes, in retrospect now, that does seem to make more sense. The easy answer, which we took at the time, was he connected with them on affordability issues. But now, perhaps, Mike, your insight is actually more spot on. All right, everyone.
Your insight.
My insights? I don't have any insights.
You're the one that wanted to talk about integrity today.
I'm too dense for that stuff. I'll give you credit for it. Anyway, thank you everyone for joining us this week on Liberty Lens. If you enjoyed the show, please leave a comment, smash that subscribe button. Join us every week, won't you? For my co-host and member of the Republican Liberty Caucus, check him out there and the good work he does, Mr. Mike Maat and Big John. Until next time, peace everyone, and enjoy your holidays. See you later.
Merry Christmas, John.
Merry Christmas, Mike.